Shavua Tov, officially to everyone. I hope everyone is really doing well, Baruch Hashem. What I would like to do, if it's okay with everyone else, to go back to what we did last week, just recap. I usually do a recap, but I want to do a recap a little bit more extensive on what we discussed. Let's admit everyone else. People are still waiting. Okay. So I would like to ask, who are you, HaMelech Shlomo? The reason why I'm asking this, because I do want to find out what kind of king and personality Shlomo HaMelech is. Now, we know that his father, well, people are still coming in. Let me just admit everyone else. I apologize. If it's possible, next time, just if everyone comes in on time, that way I don't have to stop.
We were given a wrong number to start with, so.
Okay. So, as I was saying, Shlomo's father, HaMelech David, we all know was a remarkable and an impressive personality. He really was. And as far as HaMelech Shlomo, there's no conclusive conclusions about his character. And even more so, there are contradictions between the verses, and we're going to learn those contradictions. Now we'll see descriptions that show HaMelech Shlomo as a wonderful king who yearned, as did his father HaMelech David, he yearned to build a Beit HaMikdash. He was smart, he was successful, known throughout the entire world. We'll see how good he was for Am Yisrael. You know, he brought fame to Am Yisrael. He really, really did. And that was an important thing that he did. But on the other hand, we'll find that Shlomo HaMelech also had terrible weaknesses. For the first thing is he marries too many women. And we'll see how that affected him. And how marrying women bichlal in Tanakh, we'll see that with other kings as well. Izebel, for one, how much they affect not only the king's ability to rule, but who he is as a person, individual. And money and gold got to his head. He buys horses when HaKadosh Baruch Hu explicitly talked against it. Mamash. All we need to do is go back and reread Mishpat HaMelech in Dvarim and in Shmuel as well, and to see how far he strayed from the Derech HaYeshara. And something just doesn't add up with HaMelech Shlomo. And it seems that this tension regarding Shlomo HaMelech is going to be what these entire chapters are all about. And it seems that there are two different beings in this whole depiction of who Shlomo HaMelech is. Kind of like a split personality disorder. So much so that in academia, it's evident that there are those scholars who argue that the story about HaMelech Shlomo evolves into two different traditions. There's a tradition about a disgraceful king, a tradition about how a king who was given everything really ruined everything. Yes, he built and he built and he built. He built the Beit HaMikdash, but as far as who he was as a person, terrible. Some academics really pinpoint that. But at the same time, others say that as we move forward, there's a desire to also glorify HaMelech Shlomo's name for the sake of his father, HaMelech David, and Am Yisrael. So I want to know, who are you, HaMelech Shlomo? So much so that there's so many different pictures that try to show, one, that he's smart, one, that he's beloved, and one that he's just misken, who is just trying his hardest, but everything around him is crumbling. So keep in mind this idea that we don't know who he is, and there's a reason for it, because we don't know anything about his adolescence. We don't know anything about who he was as a child. And even more so, he was given this crown just because he was a son of a Melech David. All other kings that came before him, Shaul and David, were kings because of who they were, who their personality was, their character. So much so that we're told all about Shaul HaMelech, who he was, what his character was all about. The same thing with David. He was a warrior. He stepped up when no one else was willing to step up. But Shlomo HaMelech, did he deserve to be king? What were his personality, his character traits that proves that he could be a good king? And even more so, we're showed also, we saw this in last perek, that he didn't have what it takes. He had brilliance, but maybe more of an intellectual brilliance than a statesman brilliance. And he had to ask Hashem, look, I can't do this on my own. I need help. And therefore, who are you? You deserve to be king, or were you just forcefully put into the position of being king? And because of that, you had to grow into this tafkid, into this job of being king. So I think the jury's out on Shlomo, and we really have to try to find out who HaMelech Shlomo is. So I put a big question mark, because I think that's what we're going to be doing in the next couple of chapters. And I want to go back to what we do know about him from just a story that we saw is a little bit difficult for us to read through. It's the story of the two women and the one baby, the two prostitutes and the one baby, or whatever. So we saw and we read through it, and we saw one possible explanation, and that is, he is brilliant. Why? Because Hashem gave him a lev shomea lishpot. So he was able to figure out a way, with his depth of understanding, with his depth of being a statesman, because that's what God gave him, and by lifting up the baby and threatening to divide the baby into two, he knew, as one of you had mentioned, Harriet mentioned, of course he knew that the real mother is going to throw herself on the baby, and that's going to be the real mother. So he took a risk, but it wasn't really a risk. It was a depth of understanding of human character. And that's a brilliance that Hashem gave him. Lev shomea lishpot. That's wonderful. But we also saw, when we read through the text itself, we saw another possibility, that he was lucky. Both women could have been right, and we have no way of knowing, and we read it two different ways. One, the first one, who was telling the story, who is the one that Shlomo ends up giving the baby to, is the one who was making up the whole story, because we saw in the text, how could she have possibly known, what happened at night if she was sleeping? So it couldn't have been her. But in the same way, we also read that it could have been her, because she was the one who pleads, and she was the one who throws herself on the baby. So Shlomo HaMelech couldn't have possibly have known really what was going on. So therefore, he was just simply lucky, totally lucky. But what I asked on that part was, why didn't he ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help? That's what every king is supposed to do. That's what the Urim and Tumim is about. That's what Shmuel and Avi had warned Shaul and David about. And something that Shaul failed, and how David HaMelech didn't fail, even though he was on a personal level, he made many mistakes, he does ask God for everything, when to fight a war and what to do. Also, he was surrounded by good women. Whereas Shlomo HaMelech, the jury's out yet because we don't know anything besides one, Bat Paro. But as someone here mentioned to me and told me a couple of times through a discussion I had with WhatsApp, is a king is supposed to just be decisive. A king is supposed to be able to just give his opinion because he's the king, and he should be able to rule. That's the job of a king. He is the dayan, he is the executioner, but he's also the judge. So that's what he did. But my question on that is, it's true, but he's supposed to always aspire for true justice. A Jewish king doesn't just rely on his own cup. He has to be tzodek. We say we're going to read very soon, tzedek tirdof, twice. So it's not enough that he actually just gives his ruling, being decisive, because that's what his job is. He has to really try to get to the emet. And we saw with this specific derech, it was impossible for him to really have known. The third possibility that we saw was basically hashgacha pratit. As Rashi said, yatz'a bat kol, and told him, zot hi imo, this is the right mother. Now, these are the three possibilities that exist. You can choose what you prefer. That he was brilliant, that's what we were brought up on, lev shomer lishpot. The other one was sheer luck, or he was just being decisive as a king. But the question I have on that again is, why did he not consult with Hashem? King is supposed to get used to that. That's why kings have a little Sefer Torah always in their shirt, in their garments, to remind them, yes, a king has a lot of power. But with power comes responsibility, the responsibility of being just. And the other one is Ashgacha Pratit, which shows the aura around Shlomo HaMelech's personality, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was with him at all times. Either way, these three readings only show what we initially started, what I said in the beginning as my Hakdama, is the jury is out on who are you, HaMelech Shlomo. We don't know. Are you a good king? Are you a king that cares about his people? Or possibly, if we go down the middle road that we said over here, is it all about you? Is it turning into you? Is power getting to your head? Why? Because you didn't work for this specific role. You just became king. It was given to you. Now, Shaul HaMelech, it was given to him too, but we were told that he has the personality for it. David HaMelech worked very hard for it by fighting. What did Shlomo HaMelech do to deserve to be king? I give a mashal many, many times of something that happened to me personally. When I was about 12, maybe 13, I had a job in Ramot, where I grew up. I was one of the cleaners of the shul. My father, Baruch Hashem, was one of the Gabaim, a very important Vad member for many, many years. And because of that, Baruch Hashem, the kids, not just me, but many of my friends, we went over to my father and to other Vad members and said, we would like a job to clean the shul. And they said, no problem. And they would give us like a kesef katan. So we received, I remember, it was 200 shekel for a month of cleaning. Each person, we were two, and we switched every month. It was my friend and myself, and my older brother and his friend as well. And we switched every month. And I remember, and my father might remember this as well, that one of the first times I received that 200 shekel, my father said, here, this is 200 shekel that I want to give you because I love you and because I appreciate your work. And here's 200 shekel that you earned because you worked hard cleaning up the shul every Friday for a month for 3-4 hours. Now I looked at these two shtarot, shtarot of kesef, of money. And I saw 200 shekel on my left and 200 shekel on my right. The left one was given to me by the good heart of my father, and the right one because I earned it. And what did I like more? What did I think was more valuable? The 200 shekel that I received that I worked for. So I want to ask Shlomo HaMelech, are you working hard to be king? Or is it just coming easy to you? What does it take to be a king? You are the son of David HaMelech, Eved Hashem. Who are you? Well, let's find out. But before we find out, as I was saying before, this complexity is true. And if I go back to what I said about the academics, when the academics try to say there are two versions of Shlomo, one that is depicted as a terrible, despicable person, and the other one who is wonderful, glorious, the reason why they have to show those two variations, those two versions, is because they are unable to cope with complex messages. They can't. Whereas a good Jew, an Eved Hashem, our job is to cope with this complex messages. You know, being a modern Orthodox Jew is coping with a complexness of not saying no to everything, which would mean I'm far on the right, but not saying yes to everything either. It's finding the limitations that allow us to be who we are. It's not easy. I have discussions with my kids all the time of how to really be a good Jew by incorporating the world that Hashem gave us. So that's what I want to find out about Shlomo HaMelech.
So I just have a simple question, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Why can't he be a combination, just like each of us is a combination of traits? And depending, because we don't know how he was brought up, we don't know his input, we don't know what impressed him when he was 12, when he was 15. We don't know. Every kid, you know, you're surprised when you talk to people, like what impressed you? Say, gee, I didn't know that, you know, and he's a combination. And I think you nailed it when you said he had to grow into the position based on all of that.
And definitely, that's one of the jobs we have as readers is, you know, what's nice about the reader is that we get to decide for ourselves. It's different than Torah. Torah is a set of rules and regulations. It's our Torah Emet of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Tanakh, the stories, the Nevuot are given to us to learn from. And it could be every generation has what they need to learn from Shlomo HaMelech. And not everyone will agree, but I agree with you that we have to find the meaning in between the lines, to find out really, maybe the complexities is really what it's all about. And maybe he's a little bit of both. Maybe a king by definition can't be one or the other. He's got to be a little bit of all. But let's see as we go forward. What I want to do now is, and this is important because it's part of the perek of what we're going to be learning, perek Dalet, is to make a little bit of a comparison between King David, KD, and KS, Melech Shlomo, King Shlomo. To start with, I'm going to show a Gemara that is, mentioned in a Masechet Shabbat. I have it in front of you. I have Schottenstein, the English version, just to go through it, but you can see what it says over here. I'm going to start the Gemara, but I like reading the text itself. But to give you the gist, basically it's saying that Shlomo HaMelech did not deserve to enter Olam Haba. What? HaMelech Shlomo didn't deserve to enter Olam Haba? Mishlei, Kohelet, the guy who built Beit HaMikdash. Yes, the Gemara says he was not eligible to enter Olam Haba. Amazing. Let's read inside. Kshebana Shlomo HaMelech et Beit HaMikdash. When Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash, bikesh leachnis Aron levet kodshei HaKodeshim. What did he want to do? Well, the most important thing about Beit HaMikdash, he sought to bring the Aron into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Bring the Shechina in. Davku she'arim ze bazeh. However, the gates of the Kodesh HaKodeshim clung to each other miraculously and could not be opened. They didn't want to open for HaMelech Shlomo. So what did Shlomo do? Hachacham mikol ha'adam. Amar Shlomo 24 renanot. Shlomo HaMelech recited 24 songs of prayer. Velo ne'ena. I'm right over here. Velo ne'ena. He was not answered. And the gates remained closed. Patach ve'amar. He then began and recited the following verse. Se'u sha'arim ra'asheichem ve'inasu pitchei olam. You know, really nice. We say that every time we put back the Sefer Torah on Yom Tov, Yom Chol. Raise up your heads, Hashem. Uplift your everlasting entrances. Rahatu batre lemivlei. Upon hearing this, the gates ran after, attempting to swallow Shlomo. How dare you try to open us up? Amru miza melech kavod. Who is this king of glory that you are describing, Hamelech Shlomo? Meaning, between the lines, how could you even know how to describe Hashem when you yourself don't even follow his decrees? Amar lehu, Shlomo replied, Hashem gibor, izuz v'gibor. Hashem. It is not myself to whom I refer, but the Almighty, meaning the Malachim, assumed that Shlomo was talking about himself, God, because that's how he was portrayed in the world as a king, the all-powerful king. Chazar ve'amar, Shlomo HaMelech then went back and said, raise up. And again the Malachim ask, who is this king of glory? Hashem tzva'otu melech hakavot tzela. Velo ne'ena. Still, they did not want to open up for Shlomo when he built the Beit HaMikdash solely to put in the Kodesh, the Shechina, Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Aron HaKodesh. So what does Shlomo do? I mean, he's probably embarrassed in front of everybody. What does he do? Kevan she'amar, Hashem Elokim, al tasher pnei meshichecha zachera lechasdei David avdecha. Hashem, turn not away the face, your anointed one. Remember, David. Miyad nena, he was answered immediately. And then the gates opened. This Gemara is showing us that he alone, Shlomo, didn't have the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu the way we all thought he did. Yes, Hashem gave him Chokhmah, but something happened along the way that caused him, and later on the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that he's one of the kings that wasn't allowed to be admitted to Gan Eden, and if it wasn't for his father again, David, he wouldn't have admitted, and he was because of his bat kol of David HaMelech. And here too, in the Talmud of Shabbat, if it wasn't for David, the entire building of the Beit HaMikdash that Shlomo built would have been for nothing. He builds a house, but Hashem doesn't want to live there because of you, Shlomo. Thank God for HaMelech David. So we see there is this hashva'ah, this comparison between David and Shlomo, and this Gemara says explicitly, David is all the way up on top, whereas Shlomo is somewhere either in the middle, but maybe even possibly lower on the totem. So, who are you, Shlomo? Now, we're going to start perek Gimel, and immediately when we start perek Gimel, there's going to be an automatic comparison between Hamelech David and Hamelech Shlomo, and I'm going to ask you to have an open mind to see the differences between Hamelech David and Hamelech Shlomo. What kind of differences? So we're going to start now. Perek Dalet talks about the new minhala, building the state, building the government, building the kingdom properly. You know, making sure that you have a chief of staff, making sure that you have a proper government with ministers and everything. And that's what Shlomo does. And I can't but compare that in our perek, what Shlomo does, to what Hamelech David does as well in Sefer Shmuel. So let's go ahead and see this really wonderful comparison between the two. So I'm going to now go ahead and compare right now perek Dalet that we're going to start now, and also over here David and Shmuel. So let us all read together. So I'm going to unshare my screen so that I can actually see everyone. I do like seeing everyone. And I'm going to, we'll read together, Baruch Hashem. We'll read together the perek. Okay. So perek Dalet, Pasuk Aleph. Vahi HaMelech Shlomo, Melech al Kol Yisrael. Excellent, perfect. He is the king of all of Am Yisrael. Ve'ele asarim asher lo. These are the ministers. Let's go. I'm going to read it quickly in Hebrew, and then we'll go through it one by one. So, the ministers. Number one, Azaryahu ben Tzadok HaKohen. Okay, he needs a Kohen. Elichoref ve'Achiyah b'nei Shisha Sofrim. Sofrim, scribes. Okay, he needs scribes. Yehoshaphat ben Achilud HaMazkir. Another guy who is the Mazkir, the Secretary of State. Mazkir. Ubnayahu ben Yehoyada al HaTzava. We know who he is. We saw that from the previous chapter. He is the Ramatkal, Chief of Staff, the General of Generals, the one who's in charge of the army. Let's go further. Ve'Tzadok ve'Evyatar HaKohanim. And Tzadok and Evyatar are the Kohanim. Ve'Azaryahu ben Natan al HaNitzavim. Two guys, one guy called Azaryahu ben Natan. Al HaNitzavim, we're going to learn who these Nitzavim are. These Nitzavim are secretaries who were given, maybe even possibly governors of states. You know, we have a very big country, and we'll see in a minute how Melech David divides the country into parts, and each part has a governor. He's really building his kingdom. Zavud ben Natan Kohen Re'eh HaMelech, and another guy called Zavud. Who is he? He's Re'eh HaMelech. Re'eh HaMelech means he befriends the king. He is his personal helper. He is his personal assistant. Re'eh HaMelech. See what that means? Pasuk Vav, Achishar al Habayit. Al Habayit must be someone who's in charge of the palace. Someone who's in charge of the White House, in charge of the Knesset. And Adoniram ben Avda al Hamas. Of course, you need somebody who's in charge of the tax, the minister of taxes, the treasurer. Pasuk Zayin. After all of this, he divides his kingdom into these ministers and Kohanim and Secretary of State and a general. Now it's time for us to understand how he divides the country into different parts. And he has governors in charge of each part. Maybe call them mayors of cities, but bigger cities, bigger parts of Israel. Okay, so Pasuk Zayin. Velishlomo shneim asar netzivim al kol Yisrael. Okay, he divides Israel into 12 parts. What are these governors in charge of? V'chilkelu et hamelech ve'et beito. Simply put, they're in charge of making sure that the palace is run and it has money and it has food. Every month, chodesh bashana yeh al ha'echad lechalkel. 12 governors who are in charge of 12 different parts that is divided by Shlomo. Each governor is in charge of making sure that taxes are being paid, making sure that every month the palace and the king are taken care of. So there's 12 because there are 12 months in the year. And Eile Shmotam. These are the names. I'm going to go through it really quickly, but they are important. Pasuk Chet. Eile Shmotam. Ben Chur behar Ephraim. Ben Deker b'Makat u'b'Sha'alavim u'Beit Shemesh ve'Elon Beit Hanan. By the way, it's really beautiful to be able to see the names that still exist today, Baruch Hashem, Beit Shemesh and Sha'alavim, that are so beautifully, that they remain today, just to show how amazing our. Okay, I've been told that I'm moving too enthusiastic here. I will try not to touch the table so the doesn't move. Okay, Baruch Hashem. Pasuk Yud, Ben Chesed ba'arubot, b'chol eretz Chefer, Ben Avinadav kol nafat doar, Tafat bat Shlomo, hayta lo leisha. Conveniently put it here in the middle of nowhere, just in the middle of everything, that he has a daughter called Tafat. Okay, we'll talk about that a little later if we have time. Pasuk Yud Bet, Ba'ana ben Achilud, Ta'anach u Megiddo. Again, Megiddo is another place in Israel. Bechol Beit She'an, asher etzel Tzeratana, mitachat liYisrael, Emek Yisrael, mi Beit She'an ad Avel Mechola, ad me'ever leyokme'am. Nice. Pasuk Yud Gimel, Ben Gever beRamot Gilad, לא חוות יאיר במנשה אשר בגלעד, לא חבל ארגוב אשר בבשן, 60 ערים גדולות, חומה ובריח נחושת. I'm in פסוק י"ד now, 14. אחינדב בן עידו מהחניימה. 15, Achimatz ben Naphtali. All these are the governors, the 12 governors that are dispersed all over Israel, so that each governor can make sure that he takes care of the king's palace and his belongings 1 month per year. Pasuk, the end of Tetvav. Achimatz ben Naphtali, gam hu lakach et Bosmat bat Shlomo leisha. Who are these girls? I mean, where do they come from? Is it bat Shlomo, bat Paro? Did he marry some other woman that we didn't even hear about? How come we're not told about these wonderful, amazing women that are meshadech their girls to the governors, no less? Protektiot someone? Let's go further. Pasuk Tet Zayin. Ba'ana ben Chushai be'asher uv'alot. Yud Zayin Yoshafat ben Paruach be'Yisachar. Shimi ben Elah be'Binyamin. Okay, Binyamin has one too. And Yud Tet, Pasuk 19. Gever ben Uri be'eretz Gilad. ארץ סיחון, מלך האמורי ואוג מלך הבשן, ונציב אחד אשר בארץ. פסוק כ', the last pasuk of our chapter, יהודה וישראל רבים כחול אשר על הים, לרוב אוכלים ושותים ושמחים. Let's just jump right to the last pasuk. It seems that the bracha to Avram Avinu has finally come true. As we read, Yehuda v'Yisrael rabim kachol asher al hachol al hayam larov ochlim v'shotim usmechim. What can be better than that? Amazing. What an amazing, great a nation we've become. A king who's smart, who's brilliant, who has a government, and he made sure they're all perfect. Just one question I would like to ask you about that one last pasuk. Yehuda v'Yisrael rabim kachol asher al hayam larov ochlim v'shotim usmechim. What about Torah? All I can read here is food, drink, and they're happy. We know for a fact that Shabbat is about ochel. We know. En simcha ela bebasar v'yayin. So one would say, perfect. But we know that it's only a means to an end. The end is chakira and drisha v'kadosh baruch hu. It's learning Torah. It's elevating this world. Yet here I don't see any of that. Now it could be that we didn't get there yet. Could be this is just a depiction of the gashmiut. What bothers me here as well is, where is the Torah? Where is the morals? It just says, ochlim v'shotim usmechim, and if I didn't know so, I'd say, Achashverosh's banquet. That goes back to what I'd mentioned to you in the beginning, when we discussed Esther Amalka as well. So kind of a full circle, but again, the jury's out. The jury is out because we can see Shlomo as a wonderful human being, the one who has chokhmah like nobody else. But we also see somebody who will later on do terrible things. Let's go into the first part and do that hashva, that comparison to HaMelech David, as I mentioned before. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Okay. Everyone can see my screen, I hope. Yofi. So let's do that hashva'ah. Now the hashva'ah is the government that Shlomo HaMelech went with. He just meant starting from Pasuk Bet, right? You can see up here, starting from Pasuk Bet, to what David HaMelech did also when he was king. He also created a government. So let's start. The first thing that Shlomo does, if you go to Pasuk Bet, is he has a Kohen. Now, if you see, as far as the placement of where the Kohen is, Shlomo makes sure that the Kohen is number 1 on the list. It's the first thing that he does. Whereas David HaMelech, so we have, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the Kohanim are only 6th on the list of HaMelech Shlomo, which begs us to ask, why is there a difference? So maybe one of the possibilities is that a priest is very important to Shlomo because Shlomo wants to build the Beit HaMikdash. What do we need in the Beit HaMikdash? We need a Kohanim. Maybe the last thing that Shlomo is thinking about now are wars. Why? Because David HaMelech, his father, fought the wars for him. Could be that that's the reason. Let's continue to the next thing that Shlomo does. Sofrim. Now, if you see over here, number 5 on the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 list, David also has a sofer. Now, Shlomo has sofrim, whereas David has one sofer. What can we possibly learn about that? Is that from a national point of view, what Shlomo HaMelech did is pretty amazing. He has created a situation where he needs many scribes because his interrelations and his international relations with other countries are so vast and grand that he needs many scribes who are in charge of writing everything and sending out the letters and accepting and going. Whereas HaMelech David had a smaller area, therefore he just needed one sofer. But look also where it puts, and when we see the whole thing, we'll see the comparison about the differences between David and Shlomo. Let's continue the next wing. So the Mazkir is number 3 on both of their lists. Once we're done, we're going to go through them. The Secretary of State is 3 on both lists. We'll see what that means. Number 4 on Melech Shlomo's list is the general. Number 4 on the list is HaMelech Shlomo's general, chief of staff, whereas with David HaMelech, it's number 1. Now, we know why. We know the reason. Because unlike Shlomo, instead of a military minister at the top of the list, and we find the military general, the Ramatkal, at the top of David's list, is because David needed to conquer. David needed a tzava in order to establish a state of Israel, whereas Shlomo was given to him on a platter, so he doesn't need it. So we can see the priorities between Shlomo and David of how they're setting things up. It's important to note. Soon we'll kind of summarize the whole thing. Ala nitzavim, that's something that David didn't have, because David was fighting to create a nation, trying to unite a nation. And when you unite a nation, you want to have one person on top of everything. That's who he was. Had he divided everything, maybe there would have been more quarreling. Whereas Shlomo is so confident that he has a great nation already, he can divide it up. But we'll see in a minute why he divides it up and how he divides it up. Is it for his benefit or is it for the benefit of the people? Let's continue the comparison. Okay, so we said Re'eh HaMelech is the personal assistant. So the personal assistant is not very important on both of their lists, but we can see it's a little bit more important on Shlomo's list than it is on David's list. Let's continue. Achishar el Habayit, another thing that doesn't exist with David. Why? Well, I can just say David had much smaller palace. He didn't need maybe a butler who was in charge of this vast, great palace that Shlomo had. And we see later on, Shlomo didn't stop building for himself or for Am Yisrael. We'll see how that goes on later on after he builds the Beit HaMikdash. The last thing on the list of Shlomo HaMelech, which is also on David, is Al-Hamas, Adoniram ben Avda Al-Hamas, the treasurer. Interesting how it's the last thing on Shlomo HaMelech's list, whereas in David HaMelech, it's pretty high up. Why is it pretty high up? Because David's trying to establish, he needs money. There's no establishment of a kingdom yet. The palace needs money. He needs to buy, he has mercenaries, he's got to pay. He has to buy horses. He has to, weapons. Whereas Shlomo was given all that by his father David, so he doesn't need that much money, but also we notice that he's so rich anyway, maybe he takes a little bit less taxes. But it's interesting because if this is true, then what are these? So these we're going to talk about in a minute, okay? The last thing that David has that Shlomo does not have, I left it empty over here, try to guess what that is. Try to guess what does David have or need that Shlomo HaMelech doesn't have. And it will also show you the differences of periods that Shlomo HaMelech lived in versus David. So I'll just let you know what it is. It is 1, 2, 3. Ba-bam. Benayahu ben Yehoyada ala Kreti v'ala Pleiti. Who were the Kreti or Pleiti? Those who learned Shmuel with me will know that was David HaMelech's personal guard. Well, why does David HaMelech need a personal guard? Well, I'll tell you why. Because during the reign of David HaMelech, constantly people were trying to take away the throne from him. His son, 2 of his sons, Avshalom, 2, Avner ben Ner, possibly, Yoav, possibly. So he needed a personal guard to defend him personally. Shlomo HaMelech doesn't need a personal guard because he lives in a period where everyone accepts him as king. Everyone, hooray, HaMelech Shlomo, you're awesome, we love you. You don't need a personal, no one is gonna, your reign is not threatened. You are our king and we accept you and we love you. Now take a look at this list. It's so obvious what's going on here. David worked hard, very, very hard to establish a kingdom. Shlomo, it seems, had everything going for him. All he's doing really is just setting things in motion so he can build Beit HaMikdash, something that he does want to, what he does yearn for, which is, for his zchut. He really does. And that's why the Kohen is number 1 on the list versus the Ish Tzava David. And that by itself, these two, I think is the most important comparison between the two. David is an Ish Tzava. David is establishing something. David is fighting for something. He's fighting for something. Shlomo is not fighting for anything, but he is trying to build something. Build a Beit Mikdash. That's something that is very important for us to see, and we'll see how he does it. We also see here, and another important move is that there are no rebels in Shlomo HaMelech's time, whereas in David's time, there are plenty of rebels who are threatening David. Shlomo doesn't have any threats. You know why? Why does he not have threats? Because he took care of them. He's smart. He took care of them in the beginning. He killed, he banished in order to ensure his kingdom. David HaMelech, we know that he turned himself inside out, not to kill. He could have killed Shaul HaMelech so many times. Who was his competition? Even after Hashem promised David the kingdom. But David does not kill to preserve his personal chair, whereas Shlomo does. Yet the jury's still out on him, because, like I mentioned before, he needs to build himself up. So maybe the list that we see in front of us is how he builds himself up. He needs to build a Beit Mikdash, and you know what? Let's give him all due. That's very important. We see how much the Mishkan takes so much room in our Torah. Not once, not twice, but 3 times there's description of the Mishkan in our Torah. Something that proves how important the Mishkan is. And that's why maybe Shlomo HaMelech says, you know what? The Beit HaMikdash is so important. That's my emphasis. So let's give him due where due is given, with his chuyot. That's what he wants to do. But again, the jury's out. So let's go ahead and see the second part of perek Daled that we just learned. So we see the comparison between Shlomo and David and how they were setting up their state, their government. And we see very, very clear differences between the two. Shlomo has a grand, territorial-wise, gigantic. He has sofrim. He needs a labait. And David HaMelech is a little bit more modest. But it could be that it's okay. He was building something, and now Shlomo has it. But what does Shlomo do with this grandness that he received, even after he builds the Beit HaMikdash? Time will tell. Let's go to the next important part of our perek. The next part of our perek was the nitzavim. Who are these nitzavim? Who are these divisions, these 12 divisions that he divided up? Now, what you have in front of you is the map of Israel divided into shvatim. Now, it seems to me only logical that, and we see this throughout our Torah, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, that what Shlomo could have done, maybe it was the smart thing to do, or maybe not. He could have just had a Rosh Shevet. We have all the Shvatim in front of us, and he is Memane, he appoints a Rosh Shevet to be the governor of his territory. Right? One in Asher, one in Naphtali, Zvulun, etc., etc., etc. But that's not what Shlomo HaMelech does. Right? He divides up, we'll see in a minute, he divides up Israel by geographical areas that cross through the tribes. And only several commissioners, several governors are divided by Shvatim, by the tribes. The ratio, you'll see in a minute, I'm going to show you, the ratio between governors of a Shevet versus a governor of an area, geographical area, is around 6 to 7 in the, towards the benefit of the region, which means that there are more governors who are in charge of not one Shevet, but a couple of Shvatim versus governors that are in charge of one Shevet. Now, why does Shlomo HaMelech divide these governors based on geographic areas and not Shvatim? Wouldn't it have been more smarter to do Shvatim? We'll see in a minute, right? Let's first see how it's divided. So I'm not going to read it again, I read it, but if you see like this. So the first one, as you can see in Pasuk Chet, Ben-Hur is in charge of Har Ephraim, okay? That's number one. Ben Deker is in charge of Shevet Ephraim. But Ben Chesed is also in charge of the area of Menashe, like I was saying before, and so is Ben Avinadav, the area of Menashe. You have 3 governors who are in charge of one Shevet. Interesting. Why not just one who's in charge of the Shevet, a Rosh Shevet? No, it doesn't work that way. Ba'ana ben Achilud is in Megiddo, which is the border of Yisachar and Chatzi Menashe. Another governor, Ben Gever in Ramot HaGilad. Another one called Achinadav, Ben Ido in Machanaima, which is in this area over here. Gad. Up here is another one, Achimatz ben Naphtali. And another one here in Asher. So these really are the only ones in charge of Shvatim, and they actually are in charge of these Shvatim. Whereas here you see 3 are in charge of 1. Yehoshaphat is in charge of Yisachar, and Shimei ben Elah is in charge of Binyamin. Okay, so here we have it. Is that all? 3, one more. And Gever ben Uri be'eretz Agdi. These are the 12 governors, the 12 commissioners, or how it is, nitzavim, in charge of the geographical areas that Shlomo divides. Why does he not divide it according to Shvatim, the way Moshe Rabbeinu does and Hashem does? Lematei Reuven, Shamua ben Zakur, Lematei Shimon, Shaphat ben Chori, Lematei. Why not? Why is it divided this way? So what I can possibly fathom are two possibilities. One, the reason is practical. A convenient way to collect money and taxes from big areas. Look at Chetzi Menashe, it's huge. You have one in charge of all that. It's not fair, so you have 3, right? So it's convenient to collect the money and the taxes. But it also could be, this is an opinion, also to weaken the tribal forces, to ensure that the tribes don't have autonomy or don't have this autonomous power that one day might want to rebel against Shlomo. Whereas here you have a governor that belongs to the king that's in charge of many areas and not necessarily one on each Shevet. Okay? Also note something very clear. What do you see out of all these 12 nitzavim? Something so clear is missing from this map. What's missing? Something very, very clear. What's missing?
Reuven.
Reuven, okay, Nachon Reuven. It's true.
Yehuda, Shimon, and Dan.
Right. So this guy here, Achinadav, is basically, we also see from Divrei Hashem, is really in charge of all of this area, and these two are in charge of these areas up here. But what I found interesting is that what somebody said here, Yehuda, again, this map isn't exact. I didn't find the exact areas. I used Google Maps and everything to pinpoint the areas, but Yehuda doesn't exist. But not even that, he's not even mentioned in our Nitzavim. Why is that? He's missing. So there has to be something, there has to be a reason for that. So here too, I can find two possible reasons.
He's doing it himself.
Okay, so some suggested, some Parshanim suggested that if you go to Pasuk Yutet 19, it says at the end of Yutet, Unetziv echad asher ba'aretz. This 13th Netziv could have been Haaretz. What's Haaretz? Haaretz is vast, big. Maybe it's this huge area, territory called Yehuda, so maybe there was some kind of Netziv in charge of this Aretz. But why is he not mentioned? Why is his name not mentioned? Why is there no talk about him? Why is he lichora missing? Right? It bothers me that he's missing. So it could be, this is where I want to end with how we started. I started out today's class by saying, who are you, HaMelech Shlomo? Are you beloved? Are you following your fathers, David HaMelech? Are you ish asher lev chokhmah ben you have? Is it possible? I'm asking you this as a question because I don't know. The jury is still out on this one. Is it possible that Shlomo is giving priority and protectia to his own tribe? Now, this is not far-fetched to say because later on, this preferences that Yehuda has because of Netzer Yehuda sparks rebellion and a division in this monarchy of Yehuda and the Malchei Yehuda. Could it possibly be that these commissioners are in charge of money? That's what we said that they are for, right? V'chilkelu et hamelech ve'et beito. That Shlomo is saying, I'm not going to take money from my tribe. I'll ensure 12 governors dispersed all over the place, not according to Shvatim, because then they can rebel, especially when it has to do with giving me, more money for my palace. But he was giving preferable treatment to his own, protectia to his own shevet. It's definitely possible, which is a spark that is started here that happens later on with Rechavam and Yerovam, which is all about money. That's where the rift starts. But does it start here, possibly? Well, like I said before, the jury's out because I have another reading for you. Some of you might not like what I'm about to say, but sometimes when we read Torah, if we change a little bit of the punctuation, if we change a little bit of the periods and commas, by not changing any words, that by itself could be commentary. Let's go back to Pasuk Yud Tet, the end of Yud Tet. Look at how I'm going to read. Unetziv echad asher ba'aretz Yehuda, period. And the next Pasuk starts, V'Yisrael rabim kachol asher al hayam larov. What is this reading telling us? That there was a Nitziv on Yehuda, just like everyone else, which doesn't show protectia, which doesn't show any special treatment. Now, the reason why his name is not mentioned, maybe, is because he happens to be also in charge of all of the other 12 governors. And he comes from the Bait. Maybe he is already mentioned. Who could he possibly be? Either Yehoshaphat ben Achilud, who is the Mazkir, the Secretary of State, or, in my opinion, the last name in Pasuk Vav, Va'adoniram ben Avda al Hamas, and right after that, Ushlomo Shnei Masar Nitzavim. So maybe if I read it this way, Adoniram is the Netziv Echad Asher Ba'aretz Yehuda. So there isn't any special treatment. Or is there special treatment? Like I said before, I don't know who is Shlomo HaMelech. Who are you, Shlomo? Are you a king who's building himself up to be great in the eyes of the people, or great also in the eyes of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, doing your job? Well, I think time will tell. We still have a little bit more to read, but it's not clear. It's not clear because Shlomo didn't work for it. We don't know what characters he had that gave him this job. Unlike Shaul, unlike David, the jury is still out, and I think we still have to learn a little bit more about Shlomo HaMelech to really understand and really know who he is as a person, who his character is, what is he like. Why is it that a guy like Shlomo, who has everything going for him, as we saw the comparison of the lists, he doesn't have to fight, he has riches, he has a great nation, he's got the intelligence, he's got the statesmanship. Why does he go wrong? Why did he start marrying thousands, maybe plural, of women, and going out and getting extra horses from Mitzrayim, no less? Marbeh kesef v'zahav. What happened to you, Shlomo? Ma kara lecha hamelech Shlomo? Bezrat Hashem, we will continue, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, next week.
And is it not impossible that Shlomo wanted to keep control over Yehuda where the Beis Hamikdash was? That was really Shlomo's domain.
Yes, 100%. Like I said, it could be that that's why he had a commissioner, a governor there. It could be that he was just using his brilliance of a statesmanship to create a perfect, and we know that he did. I mean, we haven't got back to the borders of Shlomo HaMelech ever since his reign. That all could be. Are we going to go to the left with him? Are we going to go to the right? Who is he? We need to find out what makes him tick, and what drives him forward to be the king that he becomes. We'll see how it develops.
Rabbi Ote, you're shattering my entire elementary school education.
About time.
It's excellent. Thank you.
Baruch Hashem. Thank you.
I agree, Sarah. I agree.
What?
I agree, Sarah.